The Consulting Success podcast is powered by the Clarity Coaching Program. If you'd like to work directly with the Consulting Success team and receive personal coaching and support to optimize and grow your consulting business, marketing, and revenue, visit consultingsuccess.com to find out more and apply.
Welcome to the Consulting Success Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Zapersky. In this podcast, we'll dive deep into the world of elite consultants, where you'll learn the strategies, tactics, and mindset to grow a highly profitable and successful consulting business.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Zapersky, and today I'm very excited to have Jared Nichols joining us. Jared, welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here, Michael. Appreciate it.
Yes, so you are a futurist, an advisor, a faculty member of the University of Tennessee's Haslam College of Business in graduate and executive education. You're also the founder and creator of New Futurist and the Foresight Academy. We'll get into all that. You work with organizations like Coca-Cola, the U.S. Special Forces, Goodwill, and many others. I think it's important maybe we start off for some, or maybe for many, what exactly is a futurist?
What a great question. That's the one that it always comes up. Honestly, there's several different definitions depending on who you ask. From a professional side of things, most futurists that you'll come across tend to be keynote speakers, and they do really well. They get up and they tell you, hey, here's what the next 50 years is going to look like. That is not really my realm that I operate in, only because those predictions are almost always wrong. It's great for entertainment, but it does very little to help you make better decisions today. So I'll give you my definition of a futurist. Somebody who operates in this capacity is really focused on how to anticipate where the world may be going by understanding the possible implications of things that we see today. Large drivers of change, things like artificial intelligence, big data, climate change, genetic modification, and then knowing how to ask the right questions as to what the potential implications might be on multiple facets of society, all with the end goal of creating a three-dimensional picture of what the future could actually look like, not to try to predict it. I mean, if you're going long-term, that's going to be throw a dart on a dartboard, and that's about as good as it's going to get. But long-term thinking about the future is really about envisioning multiple possibilities so that you can make better decisions today.
Yeah, and I want to certainly get into what the potential implications for the future might be for consultants, because that's the community that we serve here. Before we go down that path, though, in terms of how you got to where you are, I think a lot of people would imagine that if you're a futurist and if you are trying to understand all these different layers of information and perspectives or potential possibilities, would require you to consume a vast amount of information to be able to contemplate where could you actually go, right? What are the possibilities? Take us back to the early days of Jared Nichols. Like, how did you get started? What were you studying in school? What were you doing before you started consulting and being a futurist?
Well, this probably won't be the most clean, straight line origin story, but I had actually been in the insurance business for about 11 years. I was an independent insurance broker, really enjoyed doing that. And about 8 years into that, I just realized that this isn't what I wanted to do anymore. In fact, going into the insurance business wasn't really a planned thing either. My undergraduate degree was in history and English creative writing. So naturally,
it's insurance.
Naturally,
yeah.
Right? But I mean, it's also, I've dealt with this most of my life. I'm an Army brat, so I grew up moving around my entire life and always trying to figure out exactly what it is that I want to do, where do I want to go, and who do I want to be is an evolving question.
And Jared, when you moved around, were you moving around just within the US or other countries?
No, I lived overseas.
Okay. Where were you? Which countries did you spend time in?
Well, here's the rundown. I always give it this way here. I mean, our first place was Washington State. We were at Fort Lewis, now Joint Base Lewis McChord. And that was when my dad joined the Army, I was 2. So that's where it all started. From there, we went to Hawaii, Schofield Barracks. From Hawaii, we went to, in typical Army fashion, they send you from paradise to hell. We went to Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. We were there 6 months. And then we were sent to El Paso, Texas, Fort Bliss. And then from Fort Bliss, we were sent to northern Germany, a small installation called Garlstedt, beautiful up there in northern Germany. And that was around the time of the drawdown. So under the Clinton administration, they started drawing down a lot of these bases. So we were there for a year and then moved down to southern Germany in a place called Gießen. And then from there to Georgia, Fort Benning. And then from Fort Benning to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. And that's where I graduated from high school. And then I went to school in Georgia, and my mom and dad were stationed in 3 different places, 2 of them overseas. And then they finished up in upstate New York.
What was that like for you to move around that much as a kid?
That's all I ever knew. I'm starting to see it a little differently now because we have children. We're living in Charlotte and we're staying here. But for me, it was a weird idea to stay in one place your whole life since that's all I ever knew. But yeah, I mean, I don't regret it. I jokingly say that all military brats are emotionally wrecked in one form or fashion. Some of us are extreme extroverts, but I look at it as a bonus. The ability to adapt to new things very quickly is something that I've had to do my whole life. And most Army kids and Army families will tell you the same.
What was the age range in terms of when you started that journey and when did you stop?
Oh, yeah. Well, from the age of 2 all the way through high school. But once it's in your blood, it doesn't get out. I mean, even when I was in my undergraduate program, I moved around, in a 2-year span, I moved around 5 times. You get into this habit of, all right, it's time to pick up and go. And even if that was just moving across town, it gets in you. You get a little anxious, like, all right, 3 years, we're good. What's new? What's next?
All right. So we got that out of the way. That's kind of the early journey. Then you studied history and so forth, went into insurance, woke up one day going, this is not what I want to do for the rest of my life. What happened from that point?
Originally, when I went into the insurance business, a big part of that was I just enjoyed working for myself. So I've never actually worked for anybody in my entire professional career. My wife tells me it's because I'm oppositional defiant, and I don't necessarily agree with that. But it's just I enjoy solving problems. I enjoy the autonomy, the freedom to work at my pace. And so insurance just seemed like an easy pathway to do that. So 8 years in, I just kind of stopped and thought, am I still doing this? And it was going great. It was very successful. I was able to work maybe 20 hours a week, was making more than I'd ever made, was able to race and train on my bike. And I was just bored out of my mind, to be honest. I was bored. And that's when I discovered this program through another friend of mine in strategic foresight and future studies, which I thought was a joke at first. And then I went to the World Future Society in 2008, sat in on a session with a guy named Jay Gary, who was the professor at the time, and realized this is what I want to do.
So you got deep into studying about the future. Where did things go from there? Like, when did this idea turn into a business, into kind of your next career?
Yeah, grad school. I knew I didn't want to be in the insurance business anymore, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to actually go work for anybody either. And so in grad school, during that 2-year period, that was when I really started to reimagine what my work could look like with this type of backing. And to give you some context, I was one of 10 graduate students that were in this program. And the other, I think it was maybe 8. So maybe 2 of us were the only ones that came from the private sector and went back to the private sector. The other 8 came from 3-letter agencies or defense contractors or think tanks, and they returned there as well. So you have companies that operate in this realm that would recruit from our program. But that wasn't what I wanted to do. I really thought that, especially after coming out of the program, this way of thinking and understanding how the world may unfold has tremendous value that should be accessible to everyone outside of kind of the wonky foreign policy, economic policy, all the think tanks or defense. It needed to be accessible to more people. And so that was really the drive for me, was to transition my business from the insurance side of things into helping more people think this way, giving them the tools to leverage this type of information.
Okay. So that's great. So now you decided, I want to go and build a business around this. How do you do that? Like, how did you go and actually get your first clients that are going to be willing to invest money and resources into this idea of better understanding the future or possibilities?
Yeah, that's a good question, because it's not like everybody is out there saying, hey, where can I find a futurist, right? Unless you're an event planner who's looking for a futurist speaker, that's not something that people are demanding right away. So this has been part of the journey for me, is taking a more obscure idea and sometimes unnecessarily complex and making it stupidly simple and accessible so that you don't have to feel like you need an entire degree to understand it and utilize it. And so early on in the journey, what I realized is that I needed to, first and foremost, learn what it meant to be a consultant. In the insurance business, if there's any insurance folks listening to this, we thought it was cool to call ourselves consultants, but let's be honest, we're brokers. We get paid on commission from the carrier, not from the client. And so we can call ourselves consultants all day long, but it's a completely different game. The carriers would supply us with materials and everything that we needed. In this world, you are responsible for everything.
Yeah.
And so I had started working with some folks that have been in the business for a long time, not foresight, but in the consulting world. And they were excellent. And I learned a lot really fast. But one of the big things that I learned early on was this: you never want to put yourself in a position where you're a commodity. And so the way to do that is to build a substantial body of work and create intellectual property. So the early part of my career was to create a lot of content, create intellectual property, to build a body of work so that when folks go and check you out, they get a really good idea of who you are and what you're about and whether or not you're the person they want to work with. So that was a big part of the early stages of building a business for me.
And do you remember what body of work or what intellectual property was the initial source of your first client? Like, how did you get your first client? Let's start there, and then I want to build on top of that.
Sure. The first way I got a client was the good old fashioned way of word of mouth, which honestly, even in this age of social media and all the marketing tools in the world that are out there, I have yet to find anything in the digital space that competes with word of mouth, with somebody who says, look, you need to go work with Jared. Because that right there removes all the obstacles if that person is somebody that they trust. So that was how I got my first client. Where the body of work comes into that is that they trust that they want to hire me. But if they want to do their homework, they have a place to go to see it. Mm-hmm. And it's not like they're going to spend hours and hours scrutinizing your work. Most of the time, it's let's just see what has this guy done? Who is he? And do we like him?
Is there anything that you've done over the years? I mean, so you're talking about referrals and word of mouth, right? Which is widely accepted as the best way to generate business, right? Very often people are just in a position where opportunities come their way. They're more reactive, not as proactive. Is there anything that you've done over the years that you find actually helps you to generate more referrals or more actual word of mouth business?
Yeah, this would go back to the content side of things. The larger your body of work, the more content that you're putting out that's actually good, that reinforces a core message that you have in your practice.
Right.
That helps to increase the number of clients that come to you. Now, I like to always look at things based on what type of clients do I really want to be working with. I'm very picky about that. Early on when the business started, it's like, hey, you want to pay me? I'll take it. What do you want me to do? But now it's gotten to the point where I really only want to work with a certain kind of individual or a group of people within an organization. So what I found to be really successful is having, number one, a very clear message about who you are, what your core idea is, and how it fundamentally transforms the individual that you're looking to work with. Now, when I say individual, let's be honest, organizations don't hire you, individuals and organizations hire you.
Sure.
So it's their transformation or their change that is most important, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that is number one, the most important thing.
I saw on your website, you have this page that says, what I do and who it's not for. And so I think that probably plays into what you're talking about. So where did that idea come from? And I'd love to really know why you have that page, because for many consultants, especially at the earlier stages, but even sometimes those that are kind of somewhat established, the idea of putting up a roadblock or saying hey, don't come here, I'm not for you, is a scary one. So where did that kind of idea originate from?
Yeah, real simple. That idea came from Frank Kern. I don't know if you're familiar with Frank. Frank, I see as a master of communication. Man, he gets to the point. And I really love that he had something similar to that. So I thought this is a great idea. And that really fit in with what I was trying to do overall with the site and the strategy and the messaging. And what I really wanted to do in all of my content and my whole digital presence was make it very easy for anybody visiting to say, this is my guy or this is not my guy. That's it.
Yeah.
So when I saw that on Frank's side, I thought that's one extra thing that is a really good idea. And I know he has more psychological reasons behind that. He does a much better job. But for me, I thought this is good because it really helps to clarify. But early on, when you asked what a futurist is, I also wanted to make sure that folks that were just looking for somebody who's going to get up and say, hey, we want you to do a 90-minute keynote on what the next 50 years is going to look like, they would know real fast, that's not what I do.
I'm really interested, what have you learned on your approach and your messaging in relation to marketing and having people want to have a conversation with you? Because as you've talked about this idea of a futurist, people don't typically wake up going wow, yeah, I really need a futurist today, right? It's, hey, I have a marketing problem. I want more leads or we're losing market share. So of course there is connection to the future. And if you can envision the future and plan for it, right, that could create a competitive advantage for you. But part of me thinks that a lot of people wouldn't recognize that. It wouldn't be kind of their first thought. So what have you learned about how to make something that in some ways can almost come across as being intangible, really relevant for people so that people actually want to reach out to you and have conversations? That's
pushed through in a lot of the content. And for me, everything starts with the person. If I'm working with somebody, a lot of my work is one-to-one coaching work, which I enjoy. I don't push a lot of advertising on that. It's just that tends to be what happens. Conversations get started and then opportunities open up in that arena that are working with small teams. And so our focus is really on ideas and different ways of thinking about how the world may unfold. Because if you start a conversation with, hey, artificial intelligence, and this is where it might be going, well, that's interesting, but that doesn't necessarily lead to business, right? Mm-hmm. Unless you're a keynote speaker, then maybe it does. Right. And that's not the end goal that I have. So for me, it's really pushing on the front end more of the mindset that's necessary to identify possibilities, to think differently about where opportunities for your organization, for yourself, where those things may be. And a lot of that is removing bad thinking.
Sorry to interrupt and jump in, but I want to make this really tangible for everybody and practical. Can you give me an example? If you're saying the idea is not to say, hey, here's where artificial intelligence is going to go in the next 25 years. Give me an example of if in one of your pieces of content, or if we were meeting face-to-face at some event, what would be your message or your approach to create that potential desire to kind of try and hook me as a prospective client?
Yeah, in all of this here, the big differentiator is that I'm never going to tell you what to think. Everything that I do in my work that I do with clients is around how to think. And that always starts with understanding what are the core skills or the tools that you need to have in order to see things before everybody else. And not just that, how do you identify those things and then take action on them early? And so a tangible way of looking at that, say if you're, hey, we can maybe even just role play something here. If you have a situation or client that you know that you don't have to mention their name, but if there's a certain problem that they're dealing with, we can usually apply these types of skill sets to that problem. And the reason I say that is because pretty much all problems are future-oriented problems, right? Some are easy to fix, no problem at all. But for a lot of organizations, it's how do we ensure we're not constantly reacting to all the volatility that's going on now, whether that's in the market, whether it's in their space, whatever it might be, or they're just in that place of stagnation where they know that they've been successful. And it's almost always the ones who've been really successful. It's not folks that are dying and saying, oh man, our business is about to go under. Those people don't want to talk to me at all. And I don't blame them. I wouldn't either. They're in that survival state. It's the folks that have done well and they've hit the top, and then they're looking around just waiting to fall. So they're saying, how do we leverage where we are to make sure that we stay 10 steps ahead?
Is there a go-to question or two that you just find yourself like always asking people? And it might be kind of angled a little bit differently depending on what industry they're in or their situation. But is there something that you always go to because you find it just really resonates with people, like it just clicks for them?
When you mean like a go-to question, what do you mean?
Yeah, like in your conversation with people. So it's like, hey, my name is Michael and right? Like, is there something that you might say to me as a prospective client? And I'm just saying in terms of people that you talk to on an ongoing basis, is there something that you might ask them about? Like in a business scenario, you might ask this year, what's one of the big initiatives that you're excited to be working on, right? Something along those lines. Like, is there anything that tends to kind of bring people or get them to really connect with this idea of the potential future or just anything relating to your work?
Yeah. With anybody, I like to sit down and just get to know them a little bit more. But when it comes to asking a specific question in this area, I always want to know, what are your biggest concerns about the future overall over the next 5 to 10 years? And I want it to be open-ended. Most of us don't have a real clear cut, it's this one thing. Some people do, and that's great. But if they have a real clear idea of what that is, chances are they're already working on it, or they're trying to figure out a way to work on it. For a lot of us, it's, well, these are the things that I'm concerned about. And that really starts the conversation out because there's not a crystal ball that one person can look into and tell you, well, here's how all this is going to turn out. But most people have a pretty good idea of what is most concerning for them on an individual level and on an organizational level. So for some, it might be artificial intelligence and the impact that's going to have on their industry. Mm-hmm. For others, it may be climate change because they're in the agricultural industry or they live in Miami. They start to look at what's this big overarching problem that they're hearing a lot about. Most of it's doom and gloom. And they have no idea how to think about it, let alone how to take action on it. And so that's where a lot of the conversation starts, because for most people, the future is this idea, this concept that is being thrust upon them that they have no control over. And the reality is that you do. I mean, certain things are outside of your control, but we first have to start by changing this idea that the future is some thing that we're going to one day arrive at, or that it's this thing that's set in stone. And this may seem really elementary, but the reality is that we talk about the future as a singular thing, when really that's just not the case. It's a multitude of possibilities that could happen based on the actions you take today. When people finally realize that they have some agency in the direction that their life, their organization goes in, that really tills the ground for some of the deeper work.
While we work with a lot of seasoned and experienced consultants here at Consulting Success, I'm often contacted by new early stage consultants. Invariably, the question I'm asked is, what are the steps I should take to become a successful consultant and grow my consulting business to my first 6 figures per year? Well, I'm excited to announce that we've opened the doors for our Momentum program. This is our most popular program for early stage consultants, and it has helped almost 1,000 consultants to start, run, and grow successful consulting businesses. It gives you the step-by-step plan to help you with your messaging, your fees, and pricing strategies, how to win more proposals, how to go to market more effectively, developing a marketing system to generate leads consistently, and so much more. And right now, until September the 19th, you can sign up for Momentum and get 50% off the regular price by going to consultingsuccess.com/audio. That's consultingsuccess.com/audio, AUDIO. Only 100 spots are available to join Momentum and get 50% off. This deal is only available until September the 19th or until all 100 spots are gone. We won't be opening up new spots in this program for several months. So don't wait. Go to consultingsuccess.com/audio. That's consultingsuccess.com/audio. AUDIO. Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's very powerful because even just going through the exercise of, I mean, this is something that we've done with our team, like at our annual kind of meetings or quarterly meetings where we'll talk about what could the future look like and are there potential threats or opportunities. And just by going through that process or that exercise of talking about the future, it puts you in a position of power because you now can kind of plan for things or address things. Or I think it's just, it's something that probably not enough people do, but should do. And it's just really, I found it to be not only grounding, but also, just really empowering and helps you to plan and to take action in the right direction.
Yeah, well, it's one of those things that people think they can't do because the idea is that the future is an unknown, so we can't really plan for it. So most of the energy is focused on, here's our historical success. Here's our present day understanding of what that means.
Right. Let's
take some kind of mashup of this and throw it out ahead 5 years, if they're even thinking 5 years, maybe 1 year, and let's hope for the best. And the difference here really is something I like to call perceptual location. And that is the point in time. And I'm pretty sure I made that up. So I'm really happy about that.
TM, registered R, or whatever.
That's right. Here we go. Yeah. So perceptual location is what point on the timeline that you're making your decisions from, your perspective on how you're making decisions. The way most of us make decisions is that we stand in the present, we look to the past, and then we take our successes and we project them forward. This is all for how do we think about the future. Foresight, the difference there is that we stand in the future. We look back to the present and we determine how we ultimately got to the place that we wanted to be. And because when you do that, the mind is not bound by time and space. This is a human construct that we put around ourselves. So if you can remove those obstacles, now all of a sudden you start to answer the bigger question, which is not where do we need to be? What do we need to be doing? The real question that people want to have answered for themselves, whether they realize or not, is who do I want to be 10 years from now? Who do we as a team want to be? That's what foresight really helps people to get clear on, because there's outside things that you cannot control. That's just a fact. But the one thing you can control is who it is you ultimately become over a certain period of time, which is more important to an organization than where's our position in the market and how big is our organization, what is our revenue like? Sure, that stuff's important, but it should follow the bigger question, which is who is it we are aspiring to be?
This may be a bit of a leading question, but I mean, do you find that individuals tend to think about the future, the majority, like a very high percentage of the future is something that they cannot influence or control at all? Yet, if you really start to think about the future and you go through these exercises and then take actions and steps towards where you want to be in terms of like reverse engineering, as you said, kind of where you are in the future and then how you got to where you are, right? And you start actually taking steps towards that. Do you find that it's actually true that people are able to reach that future desired state a lot more often than they thought that they could? So I don't know if you understand what I'm saying, but it's
I do, yeah.
People often think like, I can't control the future. It's like, yeah, you're right. A lot of things out there around you can't control. But if you focus on what you can control, you can actually influence your own future a lot more than you might expect. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. It does. Yeah. I mean, that's really the power of foresight, is that it's not just about anticipating where change and disruption might be or opportunities or all these sexy terms we like to use. Right. It's really about having the ability to influence future outcomes. This is how think tanks, various agencies have utilized this skill set to shape foreign policy, to shape economic policy.
Right.
All of it ends up, the way it's been utilized has been about influencing certain narratives over 10 to 20 years. It's a science, it's an art and it's a science. Yeah. And this is why more people having the ability to do this, in my mind, is very important.
It's interesting. I mean, I've spent very little time thinking about this at a policy level or an economic level. It's just more something that I think about in terms of our business, our community that we serve, my life, my family, these kinds of things. But let's bring the conversation back. So in your own business right now, it sounds like the real thrust of your marketing is content creation. You put a lot of ideas, put a lot of content out there. You're very specific and intentional on who you want that content to speak to and target. You do great work. That creates word of mouth. Those are like the main two engines. Is there anything else that you've tried from a marketing perspective that has just fallen flat on its face or that has worked much better than you expected?
Oh man, are you looking for like a specific example?
Anything, yeah. I mean,
because failures are all embedded into the process of all of that.
Is there one thing that stands out, Jared? Like one thing that you just tried, you got maybe really excited about?
One thing that comes to mind here, and I don't know if this necessarily fits exactly, but it's a story of just colossal failure on my part. I'll tell you one thing, when I do get up and give a talk, usually if somebody says, look, so I'm not saying I don't do keynotes. I do, but I always let them know I'm going to talk for 20 minutes, maybe 25. So if 90 minutes is the time we've got, the rest of that time after I'm done talking is Q&A. That's what we're going to do. I said, I'm not going to get up there and talk. I hate PowerPoint with a passion. I don't want to use it. That's not going to happen. I have yet to have somebody say, oh, we really want PowerPoint.
Right.
We really need you to do a PowerPoint. So that's never happened. Early on in my career in this, I was invited to speak at the annual conference for a large professional association. I was thrilled. I was like, I can't believe this is going to be great. And one thing they did want was a 90-minute presentation. For me, I thought, okay, well, I don't really like to do PowerPoint. I don't like to do all this stuff, but I'm going to do it anyway. So the lesson learned was don't try to adapt to the standard of what everybody else wants to do if it's not who you really are. And so I spent so much time on this stupid presentation, which really just got in the way. Well, I finally got up there and started to give this presentation. The technology failed. The video pieces that were in there all fell apart. None of it worked right. And I had 90 minutes to kill. It was terrible. So the immediate feedback from the audience was not great, obviously. And so the lesson that I learned here was that trying to do things the way that everybody else has done them will never serve you. It just never will. That was a colossal failure, one that I have not repeated since. So I think of that like on a grand stage where other people see you failing in real time.
Right.
That's always a good lesson. Other stuff is really launching a new product or something in the digital space that maybe doesn't take off the way you think it's going to take off. But for me nowadays, bringing that full circle, if I create something, the first question I ask myself, is this a one-off? Or is this something that can scale? And maybe not just scale from a revenue standpoint, but if it's just simple content creation, how can I take one piece of content and turn it into 10 without having to do more work? So that's really the way that I look at things to try to mitigate that potential failure again and keeping expectations where they need to be.
So you have provided like talks and workshops, you do custom engagements, you have coaching, you also have digital product. What percentage of your business would you kind of attribute to each one of those currently?
Yeah, I would say one-to-one work, coaching work, and workshops is probably the largest part of my business right now. Because for a lot of folks, they want to get a taste of what strategic foresight is. So the workshops are great. And then the one-to-one work usually follows along after that. If it's with a team, with a board of directors, with an individual. The digital side has also gone well with my partnership with the University of Tennessee with the Foresight Academy. That is an area that's really interesting. And how I came to discover Frank Kern and a lot of these other folks is learning how to create, develop, and deploy a digital product, which it's always promises you the world, but it never works out that way.
It's often a lot more challenging than people make it out to believe, right? It's this idea of like passive income. You put something online and I can just make money, but it takes a lot more work than that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and you also realize quickly that in that world, unless you're in the digital marketing space, for example, most digital marketing products, tools, and tricks and all of that are designed by digital marketers to teach other digital marketers how to be great digital marketers. So if you're in the consulting space outside of that realm, a lot of that stuff does not apply. So you have to find ways to adapt what's good and go from there.
So I think this is very relevant, right? Many people do look at marketing tactics or strategies that are really created for and by people that are selling to consumers or at a much different scale, not to a business owner, certainly not a mid-size or large organization. Is there anything that you've learned that you've seen work really well in terms of taking your intellectual property, packaging it, offering it digitally, and making it profitable to sell to organizations?
Anything that I've learned in that space?
Yeah, like anything that you've just found, if that's relevant to what you're currently doing, what you think is going well.
Yeah. From building digital assets, whether it's a course, I'll tell you what has been really well is to have the ability to be in front of a camera is really important. So as you can see here, and I don't know if anybody will see a video of this conversation, but this is also my studio. So I shoot all my own videos and build all that stuff because I enjoy doing it. This is not something I would recommend to most people if you don't want to shoot and edit, which I enjoy the creative process in doing that. So getting really good at delivering your content in front of a video is really important in my mind in this day and age, because it gives you the ability to leverage time in ways that other people can't. So for instance, if we have, say, a half-day workshop and we're trying to cover a lot of things in that workshop, one thing that I've done recently, and this has been great with organizations, is I have 2 videos that I'll shoot. I shoot it once and then it's up there and then folks have access to it. And they'll go in there and they start to first and foremost understand what's my philosophy about what it is that we're doing. Let me explain what it is that we're doing. The things that would take up time in the beginning to the time that it would take for me to convince you as a group that I'm not completely insane, that I'm not making this stuff up, that there is some real backing to what we're going to be doing. But more importantly, what's the philosophy of success that we need to have going into this? Yeah. So starting it off by saying, if you're watching this, that means that we're going to be together in person in a number of days, weeks, maybe even months. And then the other video is really, here's your homework assignment. It's one of the most important skills in my field. And it gives them an opportunity to start flexing that muscle before we ever get together in person. And the goal is that we have a limited amount of time. We want to hit the ground running. Because for me, I never want to leave a group of people I'm working with a feeling that they just had a lecture or that they just learned something that they could have read in a book. I want them to get their hands dirty real fast. I want them to put things to use because that's what foresight is. It's a tool. And if you can learn how to use that tool, then you can take it back to your organization, your life, whatever it might be.
So let's dive into that for a moment in terms of the future. And the two questions I have for you regarding this is, number one, out of all the work that you've done and all the thought that you've given to the future and where we stand here today, what do you feel the impact or the opportunities are for consultants? So, I mean, you are a consultant, you've worked with consultants, you talk to many different organizations. Where do you see right now from a future perspective? Is there anything that consultants should be thinking about and preparing for and taking advantage of? That's question number one. And then the second question that I'll come to right afterwards, but just to plant that seed, is how do you yourself spend time thinking about the future? And is there anything that you would recommend so if people that are listening and tuning in right now, is there something that they themselves could do to develop the skill set themselves so that they can actually kind of go down that process and benefit from it themselves?
Sure. Yeah. So the first question was about what consultants or folks in this space should be really thinking about. I think that the threat, if we want to start there, is nothing new. It's really the commodification of what it is that you do. I meet a lot of consultants that are really commodities. They tend to be shopped around like, are you DISC certified? Are you this? I'm not certified in anybody else's stuff. And again, this probably goes to prove the point that my wife said that I'm oppositional defiant. I just have no interest in being certified in anybody else's programs. Not at all. And that's just me. Right. Not because there's something wrong with them. That's just not how I operate. From the business standpoint, it's also because if I'm going to deliver something, I want it to be my own or my version of what this thing is that can solve your problem. I want it to be something that I've developed and created. So from a consulting side, from running your business, I think that one thing that consultants should do is put time and energy into creating a body of work. And that could be in anything. Right? If you're developing content, it doesn't need to be perfect. My medium that I enjoy is video, but it took me years to get really good with video. I like to show folks that I work with. So strangely, I have people that I work with who are consultants in their own realm on helping them to develop really clear map and journey around their message that can then inform their content. And we get into this idea about video and the way that they should deploy that. And they're always like, oh, my videos look terrible. So I always have my early videos, which are still online. I say, I'd like to show you something. This is terrible. I said, this sounds like the lighting is awful. The position of the camera is terrible. And it sounds like I'm saying something really smart, but I'm saying nothing at all. So don't feel bad. You just got to let it rip. You've got to start putting things out there. So that's one thing that I think is really important for consultants is that you have to put more of you out there if you're not already doing that and be really clear on what your message is. Because in the noise, all the noise that's out there, if your stuff just looks, smells, and tastes like everybody else's, then nothing makes you stand out. Again, I'm not giving groundbreaking advice here, but I'm telling you, it works. It's true. Find something to be oppositional about and put that front and center.
Sorry to interrupt, but how important do you think that point is? I mean, you said find something to be oppositional about. So you're talking in some ways about this idea of polarization and having a very unique perspective or having a strong opinion. At times, consultants like to play it safe, right? They want to have that kind of ground in the middle. They don't want to offend anyone. They just want to do good work, good people. But what you tend to see from a marketing perspective, and certainly this is not only in the business world, this is in media, in sports, whatever, it's people that stand out that tend to get the vast majority of the attention and therefore the business as well. So is there anything else that you could just share from either your own experience or from the work that you've done that might support that point?
Yeah. For me, Michael, about 6 years ago is when I started to really shift where my business was, because for the first half of it, I was just trying to do what I saw others doing successfully. Now, there's value in that because if you're jumping into an area that you don't know about, you should imitate the most successful folks you see. Say, well, that's smart. One of the things that I learned early on from the mentors that I had and the community that I was a part of was never bill by the hour. That is a stupid idea, right? Like core concepts, because what you're doing is you're attaching your value to time.
Sure.
It's like you need to build by the project. You need to build value. Like everything needs to be focused on objectives and value. And who wouldn't want you to complete something in a quarter of the time and pay you twice as much, right? I've never had anybody complain about that.
Mm-hmm.
So things like that were really important. I imitated those that I saw as being really successful. At a certain point, you start to realize that the things that I value maybe not be the things that you value. And so you shouldn't imitate me. You really have to start to discover your own voice in this. You have to discover what is it that makes you unique. Why do people enjoy working with you? And I don't think you can do that right out of the gate because it takes several years and several clients for you to really step back and say, who are the folks that I enjoyed working with the most? Number one, the folks that I saw the biggest results with on their side and who also looked for ways to spend more money with me because things were going so well. And third, who I just always felt really good about working with. It was never a struggle. We were a true collaboration. When you start to ask those questions, you get a really clear picture on who your people are. And once you have a clear picture on who your people are, then you start tailoring your message to those people because everybody else that doesn't fit that doesn't matter. Why would you want to spend time and energy trying to convince somebody to hire you who you don't want to work with? And in the beginning, if you're just starting out, you think, well, I don't know who I want to work with. That's why you have to have time with several clients to really figure out who are my people. And once you have that, then you just start having a conversation with them. All of your content is a conversation with them. All of your surveys are with people like them. The more you can dial that in, the more selective you can be, the higher your fees are, and the more you can turn away business you just don't want.
I want to be conscious of your time here, Jared, and respect that. But I would love, before we wrap up, a couple more questions. And one of those, if we could just address what's the low-hanging fruit for the person that's joining us right now and going, okay, I can see the power of thinking more about the future. What are maybe a couple of steps that are very practical that they could just start to implement and will get some benefit from?
Yeah, good question, Michael. On a real practical level, I always start with the way that people are thinking. So this isn't going to be some sexy futurist thing. It just isn't. But I think it will give you, whoever's listening to this, a much greater advantage if you actually start to implement that. And that is by asking yourself really important questions about how you define success. And this to me is something that I have to continuously go through because I'm also susceptible to, again, following other people's definitions. Even as oppositional as I am, maybe my opposition is just a front for trying to prove other people that I can be successful by the way that they define it, right? So being really self-aware on those things is important. If you're listening to this and you are finding yourself trying to reach somebody else's goals or match up to somebody else's ideas, then you are living by somebody else's idea of the future. The question that I would often ask people at a talk, you asked this question earlier, since it's been a little while since I've given a talk, now it's come back to me, is the first question I would open up with is, whose idea of the future are you creating? In other words, whose beliefs and ideas are you allowing to influence your decisions on a daily basis? If you can ask that question and really spend time with it, what you may find is that you are allowing other people's definition of success, the world, individuals, people in your industry, to tell you what you should be, who you should look like, what success is. And that is the number one thing that is getting in your way. And in the age of information that we are bombarded with, and this is on full blast in the age of COVID, of telling you what you should think, what side you should be on, the best thing to do is step back and ask yourself, you have a certain reaction, an emotional reaction to some piece of information. Ask yourself, why? Why do I feel this way? Why do I think this way? The more you can get to know you, the faster you can get to who you truly are so that the inside matches the outside, or better yet, the outside matches the inside. So to me, I think that's the biggest thing that you can do in this world right now.
I think that's extremely powerful. I appreciate you sharing that. This next question will sound in direct opposition to what you just mentioned, but it's something that I always ask, and that is, in the last 6 months or so, what is one book that you have either read or listened to that has had a big impact on you, or that you just really would suggest that others may want to read? It could be fiction or nonfiction, but it's something that you've really enjoyed.
Oh, can you give me a second about this? Because I was on a conversation with another colleague this morning, and he said, I'm an avid reader. And I was thinking to myself, I'm an avid skimmer. So I skim a lot of things, but some things really draw me in that I enjoy listening to. And I'm probably going to get this wrong. I can tell you a book that had been recommended to me that I've really enjoyed, that I've started, is one by Dan Sullivan called Who Not How. I am a chronic doer of all things in my own business, and that can kill me. And I suck at outsourcing. It's a skill set that I really have to get better at. My wife, who has graciously taken on a lot of the admin stuff for me, she's worked with me for years. And COVID happened. She had to take a break from all that. But now she's back. I'm telling you, man, that's been a really impactful one. And then another one that I've just really liked this guy's angle. It's called the Hype Handbook. It's
Michael Sean.
Yeah.
I had him. He was on the podcast as well. So
good. Yeah, I'd like to. He and I have some mutual friends. I'd like to connect with him at some point. But yeah, his stuff was great. I thought this is good. This is that oppositional. Get out there. He's a perfect example of he literally is picking a fight.
Yeah.
But those two have been really good. And I know there's one I'm forgetting.
That's Michael Schein, is Schein, I believe. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah. I would normally have it out here, but it's in the house.
All good. Well, listen, Jared, I really appreciate you coming on, spending some time with us. I want to make sure that people can learn more about you and your work. Where's the best place for them to go? Yeah, the best place to go is to go to newfuturist.com. And that's spelled NUFUTURIST.com. And then I'm also on LinkedIn. That's in social media. That's the platform I tend to be on. But honestly, the best way to reach me is by email. And that's jared@newfuturist.com. There we go. We'll have all that linked up in the show notes. Jared, thanks so much again. Hey, thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. For more episodes and to subscribe, rate, and leave a review, head on over to iTunes. And if you'd like to develop consistent lead flow and a highly profitable consulting business, learn more about our coaching programs at consultingsuccess.com.